Hey there, Trailblazers! Welcome back to the channel where we dive deep into the universe of Honkai Star Rail. Today, we're talking about one of the most exciting aspects of the game, the Hunt Path. You know, that path where characters become single-target specialists, shredding through bosses like they're made of wet paper. If you're all about precision strikes and big damage numbers, the Hunt Path is where you'll feel right at home. Now here's the thing, not all Hunt characters are created equal. Sure, they all excel at taking down tough enemies, but if you're aiming to dominate endgame content, you'll need to pick your team carefully. In this video, we're breaking down every single Hunt character, what makes them tick, and why they're absolute game changers, or maybe just a solid backup for your roster. Stick around because by the end, you'll know exactly who's worth investing those precious resources in. Let's get started. I'm quickly moving on to the video. Before we start, if you enjoy these types of list videos, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Enjoy watching! Alright, let's talk about Suang, one of the more feathery physical characters in Honkai Star Rail. If you've been playing since launch, you've probably run into this Xianzhou Luofu warrior with her over-the-top ultimate that summons, yes, you guessed it, a giant chicken. It's one of the most memorable animations in the game, but does Suang bring the heat to the battlefield, or is she just here to ruffle some feathers? Let's dive into her kit. Suang comes from the Hunt Path, designed to focus on single-target damage and taking down priority enemies. On paper, her abilities sound promising. She can deal additional damage to enemies with their weakness broken and even refund some skill points, which is a rare and valuable mechanic. The idea is to keep her in a steady rhythm of attacking without eating up your team's resources. However, in practice, her maximum damage output doesn't quite keep up with the demands of the game's tougher content. Against the hardest bosses or late-game activities, Suang often finds herself falling short compared to other physical options. That said, she's not completely off the table. If you're a newer player or someone who enjoys niche picks, Suang can still hold her own in mid-level content. Pair her with someone who can help break shields quickly, and you'll get to enjoy her unique playstyle. And, of course, that ultimate animation. She might not dominate the meta, but for fans of flashy moves and quirky attacks, Suang still brings a little extra spice to your team. Let's talk about Klee, one of the most iconic characters in Honkai Star Rail. If you've been around since launch, chances are you pulled for her during her first limited banner. And honestly, why wouldn't you? Klee was the queen of the meta back then, with her sleek design and quantum damage that could delete enemies in a flash. But times have changed, and let's just say she's not exactly holding her throne anymore. The biggest hurdle for Klee is how her kit revolves around defeating enemies to enter her buffed state. On paper, it sounds amazing. Chain kills, extra turns, big damage numbers. The problem, even the smallest enemies nowadays have tanky HP bars that take multiple hits to whittle down. That means Klee struggles to get that momentum going unless she's paired with strong supports like Bronya or Sparkle to keep feeding her turns and damage boosts. Without them, she can feel more like a liability than a powerhouse. Don't get me wrong, Klee isn't useless. If you build the right team around her, she can still shine. But for most players, especially those without premium support options, she's become more situational. It's a shame really because her playstyle is so satisfying when it works. If you're determined to make her viable, focus on team synergy and timing her abilities carefully. Otherwise, she might just stay benched while other characters take the spotlight. Let's talk about one of the coolest characters in Honkai Star Rail, Dan Heng. He's part of the Jarilo ZX region and brings the win to your lineup, quite literally. Dan Heng might not be a flashy 5-star unit, but don't let that fool you. This 4-star Hunt character can still pack a punch. The only hiccup right now? There just aren't enough enemies weak to wind in the current game. But hey, that's nothing a future update can't fix, right? Fingers crossed for more wind-weak bosses to let Dan Heng shine. Now Dan Heng's playstyle is all about speed and strategy. His skill and ultimate aren't just about dealing damage, they also boost his SPD and Wind Pen, giving him a unique edge. That Wind Pen stat? Oh, it's rare. Think of it as his secret weapon, setting him apart from others in the hunt. If you're up against a boss with a wind weakness, Dan Heng becomes your go-to. He'll slice through them like a warm knife through butter, especially with those buffs rolling. So, if you're looking for a reliable character who knows how to handle himself in the hunt, Dan Heng's your guy. Sure, his 5-star form may outshine him, but this version of Dan Heng holds his ground just fine. With a bit of strategy and the right enemies, he can dominate the battlefield. He's a solid addition to any team, and who knows, maybe the next patch will turn him into a wind-wielding powerhouse. Let's talk about Yanqing, our ice-cold hunt specialist from Xianzhou Luofu in Honkai Star Rail. If you're building your team and eyeing him, there are a few things you should know. Yanqing is unique. He's the only standard character on the hunt path right now. That sounds pretty awesome, right? Well, hold on, because things get a little tricky when you dig deeper. While he's solid among hunt characters, he's not exactly a game changer in most endgame scenarios. Why? Simply because there are better options that outshine him in almost every situation. Here's the thing about Yanqing. He's like a perfectionist. To really maximize his potential, he needs to keep attacking the same target without taking any damage. Sounds simple? Not so fast. You'll need to build a team around him, preferably with a top-tier shielder to protect him, so he can keep those buffs active. And even then, his damage, while decent, doesn't quite hit the jaw-dropping numbers you'd expect for all that effort. It's like cooking an elaborate meal only to find out it's just okay. That said, Yanqing isn't a bad character. He just demands more investment compared to others. If you enjoy a challenge and have the right team to support him, he can still deliver satisfying results, especially against bosses where single target damage shines. But if you're looking for efficiency and ease, you might want to save your resources for units that bring more bang for your buck. After all, it's all about finding the right tools for the job, and sometimes a straightforward solution beats a complex one. Topaz and Numbi are fascinating additions to Honkai Star Rail, especially for those who enjoy the thrill of follow-up attack strategies. The duo brings fire to the battlefield, literally and metaphorically, shaking up a playstyle that, let's be honest, wasn't all that impressive at the game's launch. Topaz has this game-changing ability to mark an enemy, boosting follow-up attack damage against them by a hefty 50%. That's huge for players who love a more calculated strategic approach. But it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows at first. Without strong single-target follow-up units, she felt like a powerhouse with no stage to shine on. Things took a turn for the better when Dr. Ratio joined the roster. He's like the missing puzzle piece for Topaz's kit, turning her niche playstyle into something viable and exciting. Together, they create a team dynamic that feels both satisfying and impactful, especially when you see that marked enemy taking hit after hit. Still, her use cases remain limited. Not every team comp can make the most of her abilities, which means she's best suited for those who enjoy building around her specific strengths. Despite her limitations, Topaz has carved out a spot in the meta for players who enjoy thinking outside the box. She's not a plug-and-play character, but rather someone who rewards careful planning and synergy. If you're up for the challenge, she offers a unique, fiery flavor to your gameplay that few others can match. That's what makes her special. She's not just a character, she's a strategy waiting to happen. Dr. Radio is one of those characters in Honkai Star Rail that feels like a gift that keeps on giving. A free addition to everyone's roster, he was a breath of fresh air for players looking for a solid follow-up attack unit. Pair him with Topaz, and you've got a duo that can handle some seriously tough content. But let's be honest here, Dr. Radio does have a bit of a picky side. He thrives on applying multiple debuffs to enemies, so if your team isn't built to stack those, he might not shine as brightly. Now, don't let that deter you. Dr. Radio is still incredibly capable, even in the current meta. You can absolutely use him to clear the hardest challenges in the game. However, if a dedicated Nihility debuffer ever comes along, this guy will level up to a whole new tier of amazing. Until then, the trick is maximizing his follow-up triggers with clever skill and ultimate usage. Time it right, and you'll see enemies melt under his relentless attacks. The real fun with Dr. Ratio is how satisfying his gameplay feels when everything clicks. He's not just about big damage numbers, it's about setting up the right conditions to watch him go off. It's a bit like solving a puzzle, and when you get it right, it's so worth it. Sure, he's got a learning curve, but if you're willing to experiment with debuff-heavy setups, he's an absolute star. Alright, let's talk about Booill, the new kid on the block for the Hunt roster in Honkai Star Rail. This guy has stormed onto the scene and claimed the top spot like it's no big deal. And honestly, it's well deserved. Booill doesn't play the usual big damage up front game. Instead, he's all about finesse. His kit revolves around taking advantage of weakness-broken enemies, triggering Break DMG in a way that'll leave you staring at your screen in awe. You thought physical characters were just about raw power? Think again. What makes Booill so special is his ability to apply physical weakness to enemies. Think about it. No more fretting over bad matchups or waiting for the perfect team comp to align. This guy brings his own solutions to the battlefield, letting you exploit weakness breaks on enemies who weren't even vulnerable to physical damage in the first place. It's like having a cheat code for versatility, and when you stack break effect gear on him, oh, he shines. That damage output sneaks up on you, and suddenly you're racking up numbers that make you question if you've been playing every other character wrong. What I really love about Booill is how he opens up new strategies. He's not just another powerhouse who muscles his way through fights. He's the kind of character that makes you feel smart for using him. Setting up weakness breaks, watching him exploit them, and seeing how his kit complements other characters, it's such a satisfying loop. If you've been sleeping on physical characters, Booill is your wake-up call. He's not just shaking up the meta, he's redefining how we think about it. The video ends here. See you in another video. Don't forget to subscribe.